anyone had a chance to go?
Realize it for a very small price.
What kind of, so what's sacred place? Did people did you struggle with that question?
I don't know.
Is that an easy one? Sometimes people look at you in a blank stare and you realize, oh boy, I mean, I should have gone first. But this is the easy one. So what were some of the examples?
We were unanimous. We're all outdoor people. We all picked nature, whether you're at the ocean or up in the mountains and in the woods.
Mhm.
And, experience closest to God.
What, I heard dark sky or black sky place?
That was like the second thing, yeah. We all pick nature things too. Ocean, woods, redwood forest, and then also mentioned like the dark sky with all the stars and or majestic mountains, things like that.
What is it about? Yeah, go ahead.
I picked the little Episcopal church where I grew up, which is the oldest west of the Mississippi, Christ Church.
What was it about that makes that?
Well, I was baptized, confirmed, married there. My mother's funeral was there.
So lots of memories.
Lots of memories. I mean, I was forced to go.
Yeah.
But,
You're forced to create memories.
You're breathing and you're there.
But are you happy looking back that you were? Yeah,
But it
a
was,
place.
you know, it was a close-knit, it's a mission.
Mhm.
And the bishop who came with Mary Lynn is over that church. So that was just a special place.
Yeah, places where we mark time, mark the special moments of our life. When we were having our kids in the delivery room, it was basically in the hospital. It wasn't like a hospital room. It was like a hotel room. It has a little kitchenette and couch and everything, and we're sprawled out on the couch. And poor Polly, our friend who was our surrogate, she's in all kinds of uncomfortableness in the bed, and waiting for this to really start happening. But in that time there, we spent a good full 24 hours in that room. Mary Lynn came over and we hung some crosses and we put up a few things, and we created sort of sacred space. We brought the prayer quilts that the church had given us, and we kind of made it our own space. And in a way, in the intimacy and the vulnerability of that space, it became sacred to me. And of course, that's before what happened, which was the birth, which was unbelievable.
Did you cry?
Oh.
Is the Pope Catholic?
What was it about nature that makes it special or sacred to you? For those of you who said something about nature.
Quiet. My case, it's a particular place. It's a place in western Montana. I have a lot of good memories of as a kid from visiting from Southern California. And it's very peaceful. It's very beautiful. The sunsets and the sunrises.
So it's a connecting place with memories.
Yeah.
Again, similar. Yeah. Any other thoughts?
For me, it was a little spot on an island off the coast of Maine where I first sort of felt a contemplative relationship with God. And there's that sense of being one with God, of being one with the rest of the world, of a certain timelessness about it all. It's
Yeah, so we're being very Celtic this morning. This is all like real earthy Celtic Christianity style conversations.
Mine's kind of maybe the opposite in a way. Although the nature thing is definitely, I was telling him all the different places that, but also for me being a chapel where the Blessed Sacrament is reserved is a really very much a place for me of peace and contemplation and just getting down, quieting the mind, letting God speak. That's a really cool thing.
There's always that one lamp that's lit, a kind of eternal vigil. Yeah.
I was going to add to what she said too. Being a cradle Episcopalian, I'm old, and I miss because it doesn't happen anymore. But traditionally, when you went into church, generally most Episcopal churches have stained glass windows, and you always kneel when you come in. Go into your pew and kneel for a moment or two to put yourself into worship mode, and that was always sacred moment, because I give the Catholic churches credit, and Episcopal churches used to, it's, I don't know, it sort of enforces the mystery of God, you know, you're walking into a sacred space.
Mm-hmm. Has anyone tried to create, or has created sort of sacred space in your home? Anybody have like a little area where you have maybe a candle that you light and maybe an icon or a cross or something, a devotional? Susan has?
We're in the process of.
Mm-hmm.
Corner of the bedroom.
Little corner of the bedroom.
Got a candle, and so she does some reading and stuff.
Mm-hmm.
We do that during Advent.
Mm-hmm. So seasonal. Mm-hmm. Kind of a regular practice during Advent. Yeah. It's something that you might want to consider. As Episcopalians, right, we're kind of trained to look at place as a kind of the entrance of sacred space, to sort of get us in that God mode, I think I heard someone say. So you can create that at home, right? Like a little fountain, a little dribbly fountain, one of those meditation bowls, right? It goes on forever. Tibetan prayer bowl. Yeah, whatever it is for you, it's an opportunity to find that sort of sacred space to do prayer, to do meditation in a more intentional way than maybe while you're cooking dinner, which works as well. But sometimes by having a place that's set apart, there's something about that enables us or calls us to it in a different way. So think about that in your own place, in your own house or space. Okay, so let's.
I have a chair.
Yeah.
That's pretty simple. It's just a chair. It's my thinking chair.
Mm-hmm. Oh, I love that, the thinking chair. Yeah. Yeah. I have a rocking chair that I used to nurse the babies.
Hello.
And that's become a kind of a special chair now for that similar.
Did you say thinking or sleeping?
All right. Well, let's check in to see what our poet Kathleen Norris has to offer us on this topic, and then, as always, take any notes of anything you see that inspires you or interests you, and then we can talk about it afterwards.
Hello, friends, and
Maybe
welcome
we can
to
get
this
the light.
fourth session. I was just thinking about the sequence that we've been following, beginning with belief matters, then Bible matters, community matters, and now we come to place matters. And as I was thinking about that, I've been aware of the issue of context and place in all the other three sessions. So I feel really, actually I think the timing is bang on, that we come now to intentionally address the question of place and how it matters in the teaching of Kathleen Norris under the umbrella of embracing a life of meaning. So Kathleen, I'm ready for place.
Okay, well, I think despite all the wonders of wireless connectivity and virtual space, we human beings are grounded inescapably in a physical reality. No matter where we are, we'll always exist in a particular place in the world, in one geographical spot. We're always in a place. And we start out that way. We're placed in families, in particular towns, in cities, in cultural, religious, social traditions. And as restless young adults, we may seek to leave these places behind, and we may need to leave them behind, but that means that we're simply moving on to another place. One great advantage, I think, of American culture is that so many of us have the opportunity to improve our lot by moving to places that offer better prospects for education or employment. And I think it's still true even in a stressed economy today. Compared to most other countries in the world, we have a society with relatively fluid social structures. We don't need official permits, for example, to be allowed to change careers or move to a different city or to a different county or state. We don't have a strict caste system. It isn't necessarily our family heritage that confers social status. Getting a good education, earning a good income, becoming a philanthropist will do. But this basically good thing can have a bad effect on us if we fall into a pattern of having to always move on, because no one place satisfies us. No one place meets the ideal we've established in our minds. Having too many options can be a trap. The constants in our lives, those treasured relationships with family and friends, they are what help give life meaning. But if we're just drifting along with only temporary and superficial relationships, we may decide that life has no meaning at all. The ancient monastic wisdom of the Benedictines has something to offer us here, recognizing that while people need both stability and mobility, they also need some balance between them. There are two vows of monastic profession that are unique to the Benedictine order. One is the vow of stability, in which you promise to remain in this particular community, in this place, for the rest of your life. But the other is a vow of conversion, of change. The Latin name is conversatio morum, which means a conversion of morals. And basically it means promising that you will remain open to change, open to conversation and dialogues with others that might have the effect of changing you, converting you, forcing you to change your opinion, change the ways that you do or see things. The goal of these seemingly contradictory vows is to make you more balanced in your approach to life and also the needs of your community. Human beings do need stability. Think of what the word home means to you. Even the homeless in our cities frequent the same places day after day in an attempt to create a sense of home. Most of us like some routine that we can depend on, but we also gripe about the rat race, and even worse, we find that if we overvalue stability, we stagnate. We're in danger of clinging to that familiar idol of, but that's the way we've always done it. But we human beings also need change. It can shake us up in healthy ways. Often our first instinct is to resist it, and I think my all-time favorite comment about change came from a woman in a church congregation. They were looking for a new pastor, which of course demands, getting used to a new person and their way of doing things. It's a great upheaval for any church. And she said she approved of the person that the search committee was calling to be the pastor. And she said, I don't like change. Even when I know it's for the best, I don't like it. And I think that sums up the way most of us think about change, at least sometimes. But change is simply a part of our world that we need to accept. But like stability, it can also have a downside. If we embrace change too avidly for its own sake, we can become lost and rootless. We're unable to make commitments to people and to places that might be very meaningful to us. Sometimes it takes a shock for us to recognize when we need to stop searching and settle down. I once met a Benedictine novice who had gone to Thailand and tried to join a Buddhist monastery, and they told him, go home and learn your own tradition first. Become a Christian monk, and then you might be ready to become a Buddhist monk. And I will never forget the first Bible study I attended with the women of the rural Presbyterian church I had joined in my 30s. I had a new Bible that had been a gift to me from my husband, but these women came with their old, battered, well-used Bibles with cracked spines, Bibles that had gotten them through some hard times and had given them joys that otherwise were hard to come by in the difficult circumstances of dryland farming, basically, on the Great Plains. And, being married, having children, losing children, all the events of their lives. Many of them had lived through World War II. But these were grounded people, well-placed people, and while they made me feel at home, it also made me realize that I didn't know very much about my own place in the sense of where I had come from in the Christian tradition. And I think it's a common problem with Christianity today. Otherwise well-educated people, they wouldn't dream of clinging to the ideas or things they learned about, say, geography or math when they were children. But they will settle for what they learned in Sunday school as how they understand the faith. That whole concept that they might need to learn more and that there would be more to learn somehow is alien. This ignorance sometimes goes to extremes. I once saw an ad placed by a woman in the newspaper, Indian Country Today. She was looking for someone to teach her about Indian ways because, as she described herself, a woman of white European descent, she had no tradition, wiping out 2,000 years of history. There's just no tradition at all. And she found a very American solution to her problem, to purchase access to someone else's tradition. But she had clearly lost her place, and I found it very sad. Once I became aware of how illiterate I was, knowing so little about the Bible, the rich traditions of biblical interpretation from ancient times to the present, the history of Christian theology, the Christian monastic tradition in both East and West, and the long history of the church not only in Europe, but in places like India, China, and Ethiopia. Well, I decided I had better start learning and exploring, and this ultimately resulted in sharing my journey by writing The Cloister Walk, which is about Benedictines, and The Amazing Grace, which is about the vocabulary of the Christian faith, words that I had been very uncomfortable with and needed to learn more about. In a sense, I was simply searching for my place. I had found that some words like heresy or dogma were a stumbling block, but then as I learned more about them, they opened doors. Heresy, for example, everyone's favorite word. The early church was rampant with people simply trying things out, and sometimes pretty wild things. I found an old book from, I think, 6th century, and a list of the various heresies, and my favorite one was the heliotropists, the people who worship the planets that follow the sun. I thought that might be a kind of cool religion. But I could also see, as one scholar has pointed out, how heresy and orthodoxy often arise out of the same source, the same belief, but then one strain sort of takes it to an extreme, and often becomes a rigid ideology. Maybe suitable for a very few people, but not what most people would care to believe. I also decided that with any luck, the Christian faith will always coexist with heresy, because it keeps the dialogue lively, figuring out what works and what doesn't. I was surprised to find that the scary word dogma simply means what people agree on. It is related to the Greek word for beauty, a word that I had never before associated with dogma. Dogma as beauty. Learning that helped me reject both the right-wing fundamentalist Christians and the left-wing atheists who would deny me my place in the faith. One group insists that I must believe that the Bible is literally true. The other group is like my friend who commented on my religious doubts by saying, well, if you don't believe all that crap, you have no business believing in a church. Both groups, I think, are short-sighted and are certainly short-changing the enormous wealth of wisdom in the Christian tradition. Those people used to intimidate me, both sides, sort of, but now I've learned enough to stand up to them and not let them knock me out of my rightful inheritance.
You know, as Kathleen comes to the end of her presentation, we just keep sinking into this place of community and noticing where you found a connection to her reflection. And we'll stop there, some sharing, which will grow into an interaction in this group. So who would like to begin our conversation in response to Kathleen? Where did you feel connected?
Place. I think I'm displaced after such a uprooted motion of coming 1,800 miles away from my place of more than 3 decades. I feel uprooted. So the words place, home, really get me take deeper breaths till I make myself at home. I have been able, and I would say this as I mean it, by the grace of God, to home myself always in the midst of all my misdoings or learning experiences. For example, after divorce. So how can you undo 30 years of marriage? You speak about losing a marriage of 30 years. It was a death. It really, I had to embrace that. And again, by the grace of God, truly, I homed myself. I found home again. And here I am, in another finding home. Even finding a place to live has become really a challenge. where do I find a place called house, casa, home? But there I am again, trusting that within me there's the light that has always guided me. And finding home, I'm trusting I will. Not yet. I'm still in the process. I found the wilderness. I found Rebecca. I found Kim. I found this place, and this is home already. And going back home is that keeping the belief, keeping the belief.
Hearing you talk, I think of so many displaced people in the world, unemployment, divorce, also the status of refugees. Just, we are seeing so many refugees from floods, from tornadoes, from violence, civil wars, massacres. I mean, just so many people are displaced in the world. And I think that's one place, I guess, where religious faith and having a community of faith to worship with and be with is so important, because it can really help you feel that you may be displaced, but you're not alone.
Thank you. That word is especially sensitive for me, because in Colombia you really will find displaced people. You will find them. I'll never forget this woman that I just met about 2 years ago. She's my age. She's about my age, and she was telling me that you won't believe it. It's 3 p.m. and I haven't had lunch. This was displacement, really displaced person. She said, I had to take my child and run because the bullet came this way and the other way, and I had just to run, grab the child and run. So this word is a sensitive word indeed. And I don't take it lightly. And I'm grateful I am here, and particularly today. Thank you.
About 20 years ago,
I'm gonna pause it there so we have a chance to share some of our reflections as well. As always, I find this conversation of place, both as physical place, but she kind of used it metaphorically, didn't she?
Mm-hmm.
What did you hear in that conversation, that brief conversation that struck you?
Well, when Kathleen Norris speaks, it's so loaded
Yeah.
that we could take just a little piece of it and then
Yeah.
talk for a couple of hours, I thought. But one of the things, so many things touched nerves with me. One of the things that touched a nerve was the woman who wanted the Native American tradition because she felt she had no tradition.
Mm.
And I remember when I was younger, I thought, oh, I wish I were Jewish, because then I would have this community and tradition, not realizing that I had a community and a tradition.
Mm.
So that struck a chord with me, and I don't feel that way anymore, by the way. And another thing that made a lot of sense to me was I never thought about loss and displacement, the relationship between the two. And when I lost my husband years ago, I didn't realize I was severely displaced.
Mm-hmm.
I basically lost my stability and my home, metaphorically my home.
Mhm,
I didn't lose
mhm.
my actual home. And at that time, I was involved in a faith community, but it was not like this, and it was charged with politics, and my husband was one of the pastors, so it wasn't a safe, healing place for me.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so we started off the conversation talking about place as very much a physical experience. But yeah, I think I'm hearing her use it just as much around the word, for example, grounded.
Mm-hmm.
Right. Well, sort of like the woman was saying, the Colombian woman, she was saying that, she would she would take some breaths, and finally, you know, so it was sort of like those breaths were that calming, that to get her back to sort of the home inside of her own self, right? And essentially finding yourself, you will find your home. I think that's sort of, she almost was saying, to reconnect with yourself, you can then, even if you physically don't have your home, you can feel, you're grounded, like you said. You have your home because you're back connected with whom you are, so that even if you don't have anything physical, you are grounded, so you're okay.
Yeah, you're grounded so that you're okay. So, yeah, other thoughts? Yeah.
I have, I think it's an age thing, but I have real trouble, we have real trouble with change. And I don't know how you get over that. It's so comfortable where you've been. It's like a new priest, I mean, it's the same, you know.
But then change becomes comfortable eventually.
I know,
down the
he's
road.
always said change is
Yeah,
a
you
good thing.
had to change to get to where you're at today, so
Right.
we did get through it somehow.
I have always thought that while change is difficult, when I look back on it, and almost without exception, throughout my life, every change has been positive. After I have gone through it. And it has always been a growth experience.
Right.
I've always grown from the change. I can't think of any change that has ever happened in my life that turned out in the long run to be negative. So even though it's sometimes painful when you think about going through it,
Very.
once you've gone through it, you should, I have been able to look back and say, thank God I went through that.
Yeah, and I'm sure other folks can relate to that as well. It's the tension that she mentioned between stability and comfort, which we yearn for, and this need to grow, that growth that comes through disorientation or displacement.
And how to strike that balance.
How to strike that balance.
So that you don't become, you don't stick with stability so much that you become stagnant, but you don't seek so much change that you don't realize the value of what you have. And that's a very difficult balance to strike.
Would you, as a younger person, feel change, the resistance to change, as much as somebody say our age?
I don't,
Or that it's an ageless thing?
I think age is maybe a stage of life. I might think of it that way. Having become a father recently, some of the ideas of churches that I might try to do in the future, I'm sort of changing my mind about that. I need stability. I need benefits. I need health insurance. I need these things, right? I need them, not so much me, but the girls. And so I'm starting to, my resistance to change is I find increasing because of that. Yeah, so I think stages of life is something to be aware of. And yeah, definitely. How does plays, how does that groundedness, that stability that we seek, how does that contribute to your spiritual growth? So we mentioned how change can, right? How does the groundedness do it?
I think to explore change and to explore new things, you need to have some sense of safety and stability as you sort of let your mind go out. And place does that. A familiar place does that. Or a quiet place.
or,
I think the way it would contribute to your spirituality is like if, I feel like I need exercise and family and this and that and everything to be okay. I have this whole whatever we do that makes us feel like, but if those were all gone and I had no access to them, I would have just me and God. And that's how, because when you find that place, because your house can burn down and we can't rely on even being able to go to church. There's some people around the world that can't gather like this. And
Right.
so where do they get grounded?
Yeah.
They have to find the God in their heart and have their, that's how,
yeah, that's the contemplative piece that I think I heard mentioned earlier. Yeah, it's like,
It was a practical thing for me. I'm retired, but I worked for a medical company for 20 plus years. My last 18 years, I was in the international department, and I manager of Asia and Latin America. So I'd be in Korea, I'd find an Anglican church, and I could go to church. Even though the language was Korean, which I didn't speak a word of, I knew what was, because their prayer book was essentially our prayer book. And so it was nice to, I was by myself, you know, on business trips, and it's nice to Sunday morning go to a church and the rhythm's the same, so it's a practical thing for me.
yeah, because, you know, I think our worship is a great way of example of this dynamic, this tension. We love, well, sometimes we will get tired of the routine and the repetition of the liturgy, right? You know, it's the rote prayers, it's always the same, memorizing, I'm checking out. And then we had a forum on this actually, where some people experience that, and so they seek change in the prayers, they seek change in the liturgy, they want to be woken up and say these words in different ways to sort of experience the confession differently, to experience the prayers differently. And at the same time, people share the idea of, well, there's something that's very at home when it's the sameness. Whether you're visiting another church and be able to walk in there and maybe not knowing anybody or what is going on or who's the name of the priest or anything, you can settle in to the rhythm of the liturgy and expect it to basically be what you expect. Yeah, it's a tension. Anything else? One of the things I heard interesting is, does anybody, maybe you've experienced this in your life, I know I've had friends like this, I heard a little bit of the grass is always greener kind of thing, where in a desire to seek an inner peace, an inner groundedness, I think. I've known folks who say, oh, I've got to move somewhere. I've got to go to another town. I can't meet anybody, I've heard this, I can't meet anybody in Santa Cruz where I'm from. I can't meet anybody there, there's nobody here my age. I got to move to LA or something. You know, it's this idea that you got to move. And it reminded me of her comment about the fellow who was seeking a kind of Buddhist sort of journey. And she's like, and your comment too, well, you've got one. Try that out first. You know, check into your existing before you try to find the grass as being greener. And I think there's something to be said for that. You know, we're seeking that inner peace. And it's always easier to just change ours. It's in some ways easier to move sometimes versus doing the deep work. You know, prove to me that there's nobody your age in a town of 5 million people. Come on, you can meet people. Come on, you know, they're there. The question is, so is it them or is it, you know?
Well, yeah, it's sort of like you just move up, get up and move, and it's like starting fresh because, and you think it might be less messy. Probably would be less messy, but yeah, I mean, you don't.
Does anybody remember the humorist Irma Bombeck?
Oh, yeah.
Mm-hmm. Remember her book, The Grass is Always Greener Over the Septic Tank?
Yes,
I thought of this tension too, reflecting on, do you remember the Exodus story, right? Moses leads the Israelites out of bondage under Pharaoh into the desert, and what's the first thing they start grumbling about? Where's the food?
Where's the water?
Where's the water?
It wasn't so bad before.
Yeah, maybe it wasn't so bad before. You know, where's our routine? Where's our creature comforts? And some of them want to go back to Pharaoh. I almost think of that as the devil you know.
Yeah. And
did
did Moses go up the mountain, and while he's up the mountain, they built the golden calf all again and started worshiping the idols. And
can anyone relate to an experience like that? I think too about from the Gospels, the sending of the 70, where Jesus sends the disciples out from their place, right? Sends them out into the world and says, don't take anything with you. Don't take any clothes. Don't take food and provisions. Live off the people you meet. And if they don't let you in the door, go to the next house. And until they do. And once there, be with them, heal them, serve them, whatever. Connect with them, meet them. So there was this idea of, we follow a sending God, right? God sent Jesus. Jesus sends us. So we have this tension built into us, into our faith tradition of we're a sent people. But we can get real comfortable in our churches. We can get real comfortable with the friends we know. We can get real comfortable with saying hi to people we're familiar with. Maybe we don't really know them very well. Maybe actually just connecting to the person behind me in the pews, maybe that's being sent. Maybe I'm being sent to that person. But maybe I'm also being sent to the neighbor in my neighborhood. Or to the person I work with who's in that cubicle, a few doors down. That business of being sent. And so, and experiencing the discomfort of that sentness, leaving my safe zone. But maybe not leaving it forever. It almost operates as kind of a home base in a way. That place, that thing we come back to be refueled. That's what we do and that's really the liturgy if you think about it. We're worshiping God, but we're also being refueled, renewed, re-inspired, fed spiritually and symbolically in the Eucharist. And then what happens at the very end? We're sent. Yeah. So that's our fundamental place of being. And so for the rest of the week, we're sent. So we spent just an hour and a half being recharged so that we can spend the rest of our week sent. So I think we kind of live that tension in a way. Yeah.
If I remember my Latin correctly, the Mass comes in the infinitive meteor or something similar like that, which means to send forth.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah, so I know some people come to church for solace. I know some people come to church to escape the cacophony and the stress and anxiety of the world. I know the church is seen by some people as basically refuge, right? And that's part of the role of place, I heard. It's to create that safe, that comfort, that stability, that place to heal. But the tension is that not to be caught into the lure of that for ongoingly. So what are some ways, before we break, what are some ways that you have found to kind of help get yourself out of your comfort zone, out of your place, out into a place where, and it happens often when we're not willing, right? Mm-hmm. Illness, loss of job, divorce, right? The hardest times in our life, as you said, is often the place where we experience the most spiritual growth and maturity and all that, looking back. Doesn't feel like way at the time. How do we, can we? Maybe we have to wait for tragedy. Maybe we can't. Can anyone think of a time? Does anyone do anything? Do you have any practices, maybe a small group, encouragement, where you gather with people to help encourage you to displace yourself? Anybody have something like that we can relate to? Yeah.
I learned this in therapy.
Oh, here we go.
It's sort of I've now developed a kind of a way of looking at myself and taking inventory where there's got to be something going on in my life that's a stretch. And because if not, it's like stopping exercise or stop eating fruits and vegetables. It's just a healthy, I've just learned with enough experience to be grateful for the things that make me stretch. And a lot of times I feel like it's making a commitment to follow what the still small voice is telling me. Because a lot of times the urgings that I get from God are the most uncomfortable thing. It's like, why are you making me want to do that now? Because now I have to, go be uncomfortable. Right. But I know if I don't, then usually I lose access to being able to love other people, like I just start to get
Mhm.
So,
I think of the confession. We do the confession every week, more or less. Some days we don't, but most of the time we do. And I think that's a wonderful practice to do a little bit of self-inventory. I wish we spent a lot more time with it, actually. I need more than a few seconds to think of all the things I've left undone. But I love the idea of the confession. But what's missing from that? I think it feels like there's an opportunity for any 12-steppers in here making amends. You know? It's a wonderful thing to confess, absolutely. The self-reflection that you do, the kind of personal inventory that you do in that work, whether it's in the confession or any other format. But then what do you do with it? What's the thing? And how can we gather as a group or in community to challenge each other to do that, the amends that bubble up from that self-reflection? You know, I think that's a challenge. I think that's something as Christians we are missing out. The Wesleyans, Methodists, really, Charles Wesley got that, right? So you didn't just go to church, but you also then, in the middle of the week, gathered with a small group, and you did that piece of the work. You challenged each other, and you kept each other accountable. And I think that's something that I wanted to start doing a little bit more over here. Anyway, any other comments for the good of the order? Otherwise, yeah.
I can bring it down to a very practical, non-theological, a little, what do you say, something I do that helps, and that is when the thought comes up, oh, I don't know that person, or oh, I can't do that, or what one of these limiting type thoughts, I remember, oh, that's just a habit. That thought is just a habit. I don't need to be ruled by it.
Yeah, it's not who I am.
Right.
Yeah, that's very good. Yeah, absolutely. Well, on that, I guess we should break, and we'll see you next week for our last section.